Hello, everybody. Today we'll get deeper into eco-criticism by taking a look at Val Plumwood's The Concept of a Cultural Landscape. You have some foundation, hopefully, for understanding this piece by looking at previously the chapter from Lois Tyson's Critical Theory Today that deals with eco-criticism. This article is going to take us much deeper into it. It's going to be more difficult to read, and I want to talk about it as a way of really getting into the deeper aspects of eco-criticism. So I love this field because it's at the convergence of multiple different fields. It's heavily based on the relationship between language and thought and how we construct reality. That's really kind of a product of post-structuralism, which will be in a different video. But when I talk about all of these different critical theories, post-structuralism comes up a lot because for about the past maybe 5 or 6 decades or so, it has influenced our thought and our culture and the way we read literature and the way we view the world so heavily that it just keeps kind of rearing its head. It's very much what has shaped our world of thought and philosophy for at least a half century now. This idea of eco-criticism intersects with feminist criticism a lot. So if you want to see some really strong connections, you can look back at the Lois Tyson chapter and particularly look at the French feminist criticism part where Hélène Cixous is being explored. So Cixous talks about false binaries that perpetuate patriarchy, right? So this idea that we have ideas that we've put wrongly as binary opposites to each other, and that shapes our thinking. So for example, the head versus the heart. The head is logical, it's male, it's coded as male, it's strong and in control, and then the heart, coded as female, is not in control, it's not logical, and it needs to be controlled by the head, right? Active versus passive. So something that's active is coded male. It has value because it gets things done in the world. Something that is passive is coded female. The passive is always going to be overtaken by the active. Cixous also uses the binary of culture and nature and talks about how culture is male-coded. Culture is something that is human and controls other things and has value. And nature is something that's female-coded, has value only when culture assigns it value, and is always subordinate to culture, right? So this is a false dichotomy, and this same culture-nature duality is Plumwood's concern in this article. So there's heavy overlap between feminism and eco-criticism, partly because the patriarchal world has dominated language, and language dominates the way we think. So again, this is this post-structuralist idea. So since patriarchal language dominates our thinking pretty much worldwide, it's become a hegemon. So it's become hegemonic. So if something's hegemonic, that means it's so ubiquitous, so common, so overpowering that it starts to feel like it's the norm, like it's the natural thing, it's the default, right? So everything that falls into this hegemonic category is valued as something that's normal. Things that fall outside this hegemonic category are something else. And the term that we often use for something that's just something else is the other. So quotation marks, other, oftentimes capitalized. So we have something that adheres to the hegemonic ideals of the time that seems natural. And then we have something else that's different, and that's the other. You could say that man is hegemonic and woman is the other. Man is in control, woman needs to be controlled, right? So that's sort of the patriarchal set of norms that we live through, and they become ingrained and they start to feel like that's just the way the natural world is, right? So some other ideas that can fall into this category. Capitalism falls into this hegemonic norm. Capitalism coded male. It's active. It's what's in control. Everything else needs to be controlled by it. Any idea that is outside of capitalism or against capitalism is the other. Science, you could say, falls into this. This is not science denial. Obviously, big science fan here. But the way science is coded is male. The people who are allowed to participate in science typically are male. There are women scientists, great women scientists, but they're coded as the other, right? They're the exception. Any kind of like professionalism or public life, that's all hegemonically patriarchal or male. And women, again, can have strong public lives and strong professions, but they're coded as the other. We can then carry this idea of patriarchy over to human versus non-human. Think about urban cities versus natural wildlife. So this is very close to that culture-nature split that Val Plumwood is looking at here. Urban places are active, they're coded male, they're in control, and then the wildlife that surrounds it, coded female, just sort of waiting to be dominated by these active cultural cities. So the human versus the non-human is heavily reflected in this idea of patriarchal culture. Human is male, non-human is female. We could say masculine and feminine, but I'm just sticking with male and female here because masculine is such a complicated concept. More, and so is male, but like I feel like masculinity has more complication than maleness. So I'm just sort of like keeping it there for now, right? So we want to be thinking about agency. One of the big things that Plumwood is looking at in order to try to dismantle this culture-nature false dichotomy is the idea of agency. So when you put other dichotomies together, man versus woman, the man has the agency and the woman does not have agency, waiting to be controlled, right? You can bring this to other pairs like civilized versus savage, right? This is a pretty racist and bad one that has a lot of history in this country and worldwide. Civilized is male, in control. Savage, coded female, no matter what the gender of the people we're talking about are, and just meant to be controlled. City versus countryside. The city is a place where we have order and logic. The countryside is where things start to fall apart and they need to have the guidance of the city. Urban versus wild. Very, very close to culture versus nature, right? The agency resides in the dominant half of the pair. So the man has agency over woman. The civilized has agency over the so-called savage. The cultural aspects of things have agency over the natural aspects of things. Go even further. Master and slave. Master, male-coded, has agency. Slave, female-coded, is waiting to be dominated. Colonizer and colonized. The colonizer is strong, masculine, and agent. The colonized are afraid, scattered, not able to control themselves, right? So these are all the false ideas that this sort of dichotomy will cause, and we've built our thinking around these tremendously. So let's look close at this culture versus nature dichotomy. Culture as the agental part of this with the power, right? So a culture is human, and we can say human and maleness in this way are very aligned, right? It's human, it's male, it's sentient, it's worthy of having rights, it has feelings, it has thoughts, and it can do things. So that's all cultural, right? Then we look at nature and we see it the opposite. It's non-human, coded female, it's non-thinking, it doesn't have rights because it's not human, it doesn't feel, and it doesn't think, and it's passive, just waiting for culture to control it. And if culture's not controlling it, then it's sort of this like, it's a nowhere place. You know, you say we're in the middle of nowhere, right? Or it's dangerous. And one of the only times that we ever assign a little bit of agency to nature is when it's dangerous. But when it's dangerous, that sort of agency is always a bad kind of agency, right? We can equate this to, in feminism, the good girl and the bad girl, right? The good girl is somebody who adheres to all these patriarchal norms and is under control and desirable. The bad girl is not adhering to those norms and therefore not worthy and needs to be kind of brought back into those norms and controlled and learn how to behave, right? Um, so even the little bit of agency that nature is assigned is agency that needs to be extinguished. Um, what we want to do here, what Val Plumwood, I should say, wants to do here, is to recognize the agency in nature and see that culture and nature co-create each other. Culture is not just the creator while nature is passively sitting there waiting, but nature works upon culture just as much. Um, you know how people will say that nature is untouched or it's pristine or get this one, it's virgin. You can see the parallels between patriarchy and nature, right? This obsession with virginity, right? Um, well, what if we just start to expand our logic to other concepts that are encompassing this? Think about indigenous people. Um, these virginal and pristine places as more urban or more patriarchal or more like Western, you could say people call them. Indigenous people are human beings who have been living in these places for a long, long time. So these places are not untouched or pristine or virginal. These are places where humans have been. And so what happens then is, since we have to stick to this dichotomy, indigenous people get lumped in with nature. So then this colonial mindset is able to kick in pretty easily, right? Indigenous people, um, maybe they have like beautiful cultures that are tied to nature, and there's something beautiful in the wildness or something like that, but it's a place that needs to be tamed, and they are people who need to be tamed. Um, Coded female, not able to control themselves. They need to be the good girl versus the bad girl. That becomes an attitude that a patriarchal, like Western colonizer, can have very easily then towards somebody who lives on the land, because they get lumped in with nature, which is lesser than culture. Seen as not really having a culture. If they do have a culture, it's seen as just being part of nature, right? Um, we can carry this over even to urban places where a lot of people are living. So in urban places, people tend to see the culture of the urban place as the important thing. And there's going to be a landscape that they built cities in, right? So there's going to be geological features, there's going to be natural aspects to the place, but it's really a cultural place that's just been, the place itself has been developed by culture, right? But you can think about it the other way to break this dichotomy. The natural features of a place and the geography of it, and the life sustaining aspects of the landscape have shaped the culture of people who live there. First of all, it caused them to come there in the first place because it was going to be able to sustain them. Now, we usually think about sustaining nature, but nature also sustains us, right? So people move to this place because it could sustain us, and then everything that we have become developed within this setting, being influenced by that natural place. So in this way, nature has agency. It's not just culture or the humans who have agency, but the natural place and the non-humans also have agency that works upon the humans. So this is a co-creation of culture and nature, not vice versa. Um, this is a give and take relationship that we can take a look at from a lot of different positions, I guess. Um, People who are indigenous, who have lived in a place for a long time, have a give and take relationship with nature that is the same thing as people who are living in urban places. Culture and nature are always co-creating each other. Um, I'll pause this. I want to do one more rundown of what nature or wilderness looks like when viewed through this hegemonic perspective that privileges culture over nature. So wilderness, or the non-human, or the feminine place, the wide open, the undeveloped, has no history of its own until human intervention. So as soon as humans arrives, that's when the history of the place begins. Um, it's virginal territory. It's passive, just waiting to be shaped, or you could say developed. So our obsession with developing land comes into this too. Once land is developed, or once development begins on a land, that's when that land's history begins. It does not have a particular identity until it begins to be developed. Then the land itself has an identity. So you can see how this really parallels sort of like the good girl, bad girl, or the male, female, in old-fashioned, very oppressive sorts of marriages, the woman has no real identity until the man begins to take control of her and shape her, right? And then she's safe, then she's good, then she's worthy of being in the relationship. Where if she had not been willing to submit to all of these different norms, then she would be labeled bad girl, not be able to be in that relationship. So breaking this binary thinking in feminism is useful to think about if you're more familiar with feminism. Breaking binary thinking in almost exactly the same way in ecocriticism is the task here. The culture-nature divide, the false culture-nature divide, is what Val Plumwood wants to study. The agental relationship between culture and nature. So then if we are able to assign agency to both culture and nature, that means that rather than being a duality, they become complementary concepts. And if we can think of culture and nature as being complementary rather than dualistic, that's going to take us a really far way toward being able to sort of fix some of the messes that we've created. That's the way to challenge the patriarchal, capitalistic, colonial, hegemonic forces that have caused so much damage to both nature and culture.